We're getting ready to do example 2 out of 8.8. We are learning how to complete the square. In example 1, I showed you how to find the number that would make a trinomial a perfect square trinomial. And so that, what you did in example 1 really ties into what we're going to do in example 2. So I was trying to be really cool for you and put the steps to completing the square above your work so you could see it and go stepwise until you got acclimated with the process, okay? Now, step 1, and I'm going to start with letter A right here, okay? Step 1, make sure the coefficient in front of your x squared term is 1. If it's not a 1, you need to divide every term by that coefficient, whatever that coefficient is. Now, if it's a 1, don't divide everything by 1, because anything divided by 1 is itself. That would be a supreme waste of time. Don't worry about that. So, in example 2a, you see that we have an understood 1 in front of our x squared. So we don't need to worry about doing step 1. We checked it. We made sure there's a 1 there. All right, step 2. Move your constant number to the other side of the equal sign. Get it away from the x squared plus bx terms, and it should look like this. You should have x squared plus bx equals c. As you look at our equation here, we have that situation. We have our x squared and bx term on the left and our constant number on the right. Looks great. That's what it should look like as we're setting this up, okay? Now, step 3, this is what we did in example 1. You're going to take b. In this case, b is the number in front of your x term, 14. You're going to take 14 and you're going to divide it by 2 and then square it. Now, 14 divided by 2 is 7. 7 squared is 49, okay? Now, what you're going to do is you're going to add this number, 49, to each side of the equation. So here's how it's going to look. We've got x squared plus 14x plus 49 equals 15 plus 49. I added the same number to each side of an equation. Now, this is very, very basic math. We learned this. This is what we did when we were solving equations. As long as I did the same thing to one side as I do to the other, I'm not doing anything wrong in math. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to add the same number. Now, the number you're adding is, how you find it is you take b, whatever b is, divide it by 2, and then square that number. That's the number you add to each side. Okay? Now, what you did was you deliberately created a perfect square trinomial on the left. And so we can factor that perfect square trinomial. Remember, when you factor perfect square trinomials, it's real simple. X squared. Well, in each quantity, I'm going to have an x, because x times x is x squared. And then the 49. What number times itself is 49? 7. And then the middle term is positive, and so is the middle of that binomial. So a little bit of review from when we were factoring last chapter in 7, okay? So that's how you factor all perfect square trinomials. It's always going to be some binomial squared, okay? Now, on the right side, it's real simple. It says to add 15 and 49 together. So when you add those together, you're going to get 64. Now, to undo, this is step 5 now. To undo a square, take the square root of each side, just like this. That's how you undo a square. Remember, a square and a square root cancel each other out. And that's just going to leave us with x plus 7 is equal to, now the square root of 64, there are actually 2 numbers that will give us 64. You can have 8 times 8, so positive 8. And there's also negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 8 is also positive 64. So there are 2 equations here. And here are what your two equations are. I'm going to have to kind of go down a little bit. X plus 7 is equal to 8. And x plus 7 is also equal to negative 8. Okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to solve for x in each of them. We're looking for two answers. So we're going to take away 7. And we've got x is 1. And we'll take away 7. And x is negative 15. And so what we just found are the two x-intercepts, the two zeros. This particular parabola is going to have two zeros. And the parabola is going to cross the x-axis at positive 1 and negative 15. Those are the answers for that particular one. I know, lots of bizarre steps here, but once you get acclimated to it, it's really not that big of a deal, okay? Now, if there wasn't enough room for you to do your work, why don't you stop the video real quick and grab a piece of notebook paper, and let's do the rest of our work on notebook paper. I think that would be a little bit better, okay? So go ahead and stop the recording. Okay, welcome back. We're going to jump right back into B, and in letter B, we have the trinomial x squared minus 2x minus 2 equals 0. And so we got to make sure, let's do step 1, make sure the coefficient in front of x squared is 1. It is, there's an understood 1 there, so we're good. Step 2, we need to move the c. C is right here. Okay, we need to move that to the other side. So to undo subtraction, I'm going to add 2 to each side. Very good. Okay. Now notice I left a little bit of space here, okay, because we're going to be calculating the number to add to each side of the equation. And so let's calculate that real quick. We need to take B is negative 2, and we're going to divide that by 2, and then whatever that number is, we're going to square it. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. And negative 1 squared is positive 1. So we're going to add a 1 to each side. Okay? Now, what you did was you created on purpose, that's the whole point of completing the square, you created a perfect square trinomial on the left side. And this is how you factor those. You just put a set of parentheses and put a little 2 exponent on the outside, because we know that when you square a perfect square trinomial, or when you factor a perfect square trinomial, both quantities are exactly identical. Numbers, signs, everything. So the way you find it is, the first term is, what number did you square to get x squared? Yep, x. What number did you square to get 1? Right, 1. And then the sign in the right here in front of your middle term is negative, so your middle is negative. Okay? And then you just add on the right, 2 plus 1 is 3. Okay, now let's go to step 5. We got to undo that square by taking the square root of each side. And so remember, when you take the square root of any number, you're going to end up with a positive and negative version of that number. Now, I can't take the square root of 3. That's going to give me a long decimal, and I'm not going to round my answer. I want the exact answer. I don't want an estimated answer. So I'm not going to change the square root of 3 out of its form. Now, if I can take the square root of a number, I will, just like I did in example A. But I can't take the square root of 3 and get a whole number, so I'm not going to do it. Last step, just get x by itself, and we're going to add 1 to each side. Okay? Now, a square root and a non-square root are not like terms, so the best I can do is say positive 1 plus or minus the square root of 3. So my two answers are, here's my first x-intercept, 1 plus the square root of 3, and here's my second intercept, x-intercept. 1 minus the square root of 3. Those are the two. So you can either write it all in one, that's two answers just written in one line, or you can write them separately like this and show them separately. It doesn't matter, they're equally correct. So don't worry about that if you're like, well, I didn't write it, I wrote it in one line, or I wrote it separately because it was easier for me to write it separately. Then just do it separately, doesn't matter. Okay, I'm going to bump it up because I need to erase so I can show you a couple more examples. Okay, all right, let's see here. Let's go over here to letter C. I'll follow the same steps. Just watch me, do it with me until you start to get the hang of it, okay? First thing, you got to make sure the coefficient in front of your x squared is 1. It is. Move to the second step. Move C to the other side. C is on the other side. Got it. Find b divided by 2 squared. Okay? So 10, we got to take 10, divide it by 2, and then we need to square that number. Well, 10 divided by 2 is 5. 5 squared is 25. So that's the number we're going to add to each side. Okay? You're probably wondering, well, why are we always adding the same number to each side? Whether you square a positive number, you square a negative number, the answer is always positive. So we're going to add the number. That's why it's addition. Plus, in a perfect square trinomial, the last term is always positive. So that's the other rationale. All right, so let's go to our next step. Step 4, we're going to factor that perfect square trinomial. You deliberately made a perfect square trinomial here. We did it on purpose. The whole point was so we could factor it like this. So x squared, I know that x times itself is x squared, and 25, 5 times itself is 25. And then the 10x is positive, so that means my middle is also positive. Now, negative 9 plus 25 is 16. Now let's go to the next step. We need to take the square root of each side so we can undo that square. That's the whole point. So now I got x plus 5 is equal to positive or negative 4. Okay? So now let's set up two equations. I got x plus 5, that could be positive 4, and x plus 5 is also, could be negative 4. Take away 5 from each side, and I'm getting kind of low. Hopefully it'll show up. X is equal to negative 1, so one of our x-intercepts is going to cross exactly at negative 1. And it looks like our other one is going to cross exactly at negative 9. Okay? So there's your two x-intercepts right here. Those are your zeros, negative 1 and negative 9 for that particular problem. Okay? Now, I spent a great deal of time showing you these steps. Now it's your turn. Because it's a little bit harder, I'm going to give 2 points if you can show me two x-intercepts, whatever they are, whether they're whole numbers or they're not, whether they're integers or not, or something like what we answered in B. So just do your best. Just try. That's all anybody's asking you to do. Just try. You might surprise yourself. Follow the steps and see how you do. Okay? Bring your questions to class tomorrow.